So let's talk about a few reasons that your narcissistic parent is actually intimidated by you. So I thought that would be a funny title. I'm Anna Hollander Bird. I'm a therapist and coach and an expert in helping you cope, heal, and understand your difficult parent. Because it's not something we usually think about, actually, right? We think that they intimidated us and they're a little bit scary to deal with. But a lot of times it's actually the other way around. I mean, yeah, they don't like the boundaries we set, but it's actually because they're deeply threatened by them. You might not realize this because the grandiosity and the overconfidence are just really like the mask, or in technical terms, a defense mechanism for their fragile childlike core. And in this episode, we're going to explore why narcissistic parents react the way they do when you start setting healthy boundaries, and how that reaction actually has more to do with their own insecurities than your actions. So narcissistic parents often come across as overly confident or even arrogant, but behind that mask of self-importance is a much more fragile person, kind of a childlike ego that is easily wounded. The narcissistic personality is often a result of deep-seated insecurity, and they've never developed emotional tools to validate themselves internally, so they seek validation from external sources like admiration, control, and attention. So at their core, narcissistic parents are emotionally immature. Their egos are easily bruised, and they may be highly sensitive to rejection or perceived criticism, even if that wasn't your intention. One example that comes to mind around this was this recent birthday I had where I invited a family member to come who I definitely thought would say yes, who is narcissistic and I hadn't seen in several years. But they said no. And I think that there may have been valid reasons, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought if I were to confront them and say, hey, why aren't you coming? I think they would say, I feel like you rejected me years ago and we haven't had a relationship since then. But the truth is we do talk often, but I think the idea of kind of spending time with me and the fact that I've held really strong boundaries with them over the years has really been threatening to them, because if they go to spend time with me, they can't do the dance that they would prefer to do with me. And I think that is a non-starter for them. So it actually helped me to remember this, because it helped me to feel less rejected. And it wasn't like I don't matter. It's actually that my boundaries are so firm that it would be hard to navigate being with them for several days somewhere. So when you set a boundary with a narcissistic parent, it's not unusual for them to be initially caught off guard. They often don't know how to respond, because for them, boundaries are perceived as rejection. In their minds, if you're establishing a limit or saying no, they feel as though you're rejecting them as a person, not just the behavior or the situation. In reality, I mean, setting a boundary is actually a healthy thing that you can do compassionately for both you and them. For you, it's about protecting your emotional well-being. And for them, it provides a safe space where you're not giving them a reason to get into their manipulative behaviors. But the narcissistic parent isn't equipped to understand the nuance of this. They can't easily see that the boundary you've been setting is not about rejecting them as a person. It's about creating a healthier dynamic with them. So narcissistic parents often can't process the deeper meaning behind boundaries. They don't see the subtext, in other words. They're wired to see things in extremes. Either you're completely with them or you're completely against them. And this is the black and white thinking that makes it nearly impossible for them to understand that a boundary is meant to improve the relationship, not harm it. This is also why after you set a boundary, you might find that they don't know what to do at first. They may react with silence, withdrawal, or even a dramatic outburst. I certainly know that I have experienced a fair share of these, and it's not pretty. It's not that they're ignoring you on purpose, though. It's simply that they feel emotionally unmoored and need time to process. They feel rejected, and they can't always handle the emotional weight of trying to communicate. And in some cases, You might even find that you don't hear from them for a while. Again, if I were to summarize this, I would just say that narcissistic parents and family members often cannot read subtext at all. They can't read anything other than you love me or you hate me. So what can you do when you face this reaction? I mean, the first thing I want to say is this reaction is really shocking. I mean, I just discussed the fact that when I've seen it firsthand, it's taken me a while to reground myself and not to immediately taking it personally, because sometimes the reactions are pretty extreme. It's like you've been emotionally punched. But remember, try not to actually just rescind the boundary you just worked really hard to set with them. You're doing this to protect yourself. Give them some space, but don't feel responsible for how they react. It's important to not take their reaction personally, even though it might feel hurtful. Their inability to process your boundary is not a reflection of your worth and value. It's a reflection of their emotional limitations. Above all, continue to validate your own feelings. It can be incredibly difficult to deal with a narcissistic parent's reaction, but know that setting boundaries is ultimately a sign of strength. And it's actually role modeling good behavior to them. Like, for example, with my parents, I have modeled some boundaries, and now, more recently, they use the word boundaries when I ask for something. So it was really, really funny. And I was actually kind of like inspired. I'm like, okay, they are listening to some part of what I'm saying. Something is seeping in. And I know that that can definitely feel hopeless at times. So sometimes if we think of the narcissist as someone who's childlike, you, the adult child, might be modeling adult behavior that they've never really seen before. So if you're dealing with a narcissistic parent, I know it can feel like an uphill battle. But remember, the boundary you've set is actually a form of care for both them and you. And it might be uncomfortable for a while, but with time, you'll both have a chance to renegotiate your relationship, and in a way that works better for you, and in a way that you can show up as your best self. Because my go-to is always to tell people, like, if I get to a place where I'm snapping at a 70-something or an 80-something-year-old, then I look like the crazy person, right? And I do not want to get to that place. And how I don't get to that place is by making sure that I have understood and processed within myself the limits of how much time I can spend with them and what context I can feel safe to spend time with them. And also, if I am triggered by other things that don't have to do with them, it's best not to call or have an interaction if it can be helped that day, because I need to feel kind of like emotionally very tethered in order to kind of spend time with them and have the inevitable little kind of like things that they inevitably do where I need to stay centered for that. So if you want more, watch more episodes. I do have a freebie, and I also have a little survival kit for the holidays that you can download. So thank you for watching.